Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us in our actually our final installment of our Dissecting the IEP webinar series here at Mission Empower. Hope so far the last several sessions have been informative for you, hopefully triggered some new ideas, some new thoughts, or reminded you of some old things that are still useful, reminded you that you as a parent and a caregiver are 50% of the IEP team, and you are a major part and portion of the process that creates an environment through the IEP that your child can be as successful academically as possible. So we truly appreciate you being with us on this journey of, again, dissecting the IEP. So this next, excuse me, today's webinar is going to be kind of an overall review, not just of the IEP, but also some significant parts and process of the special education programming and special education process in general. So we can move to the next slide. Thankful to the executive director and founder of Mission Empower, Joe Harinda Patton, and all the work that the staff here at Mission Empower are doing in Erie and Erie County, and even outside of Erie County, helping to support and strengthen families to help and make sure that their child can be their best self, and that their student can, reach for their dreams and aspire to be as excellent as they are able to be in life, not just in school. My name is Curtis Jones. I am the founder of CLJ Speaking and Consulting, and I am really honored to be a part of the Mission Empower team around presenting information and doing trainings for those who Mission Empower serves in our area and beyond. So let's get started. We're moving to the next slide. Special education programming is a part of the IDEA, which is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. It's a federal law that was put in place to support individuals with unique needs. Some would use the technical word of disability. I like to use different language because the idea of disability at times has a negative connotation, but we all have unique abilities and all have unique and different ways of learning and processing. And so the special education process and special education programming is designed and has been, concretized and put in place by federal law to make sure that every student has the opportunity to receive a free and appropriate public education. And it is a significant process put in place, again, at the federal level to then empower states and commonwealths to have the individual ability and finances to be able to support youth and students in their particular areas. What is the goal of special education? It is really to empower students and to help them to be able to be successful in life after graduation from high school. And that success could be going on to college, it could be going to a trade school, it could be finding a job that is going to help meet their needs in life. It could be depending on the needs and the challenges potentially that an individual has. It could be independent living, whatever it might be, to reach their highest quality of life. Special education programming is designed to empower students, grow them, expose them, and again, empower them to be successful after high school. Next slide, please. So how does this work? We're going to talk about that in this webinar today. Again, if you have questions, feel free to, we're going to have a section or a time after the information is presented to give you the chance to ask questions, make comments, and we'll do our best to respond to them. Whether you're watching and participating live, if you're seeing this webinar archived at a later date, the staff here at Mission Empower is readily available to be able to answer questions, respond to your concerns, and be able to support you and your family in every way possible. So let's get started by talking about the process. Excuse me, there is a recognition that students uh, have a unique need, and in order to start the process of the special education programming, that need has to be recognized, and the recognition is that that student is having some significant challenges or struggles in the school environment. Once that is a recognition and recognized by either the family or the school or both, the process begins by the family or the school staff being able to request an educational evaluation be done on that student. So the next slide, please. And I will be moving rather quickly through these slides because, again, it is an overview, but I did want to just go through the process as fully as possible in this presentation. So the family can request in writing that the student goes through an evaluation. The next step would be a student seeks, or the school seeks, permission from the family to complete an evaluation. Uh, Again, I'll kind of use interchangeably the family and or the school in this evaluation process. Also, either party, whether the so if the family initiates the request in writing, the school can refuse to do it or not think that it is necessary, and vice versa. If the school initiates the process by asking for permission from the family can disagree. Either party can disagree, but there's a mechanism in the series of processes that are in place inherently in the special education system to be able to deal with those disagreements. We won't get into that today. We'll just kind of stay focused on the process going through pretty smoothly. Next slide, please. So the evaluation, and I want to take a moment to talk about the evaluation because it is an extremely important part of this process, because the evaluation report that is completed by a certified school psychologist is the bit of the backbone or the foundation, if you would, of the services that are going to be able to be provided, and the structure through the IEP and other interventions in the school and in the home. The evaluation report is the backbone or the foundation of that. So the evaluation needs to be multidisciplinary. It needs to be as accurate as possible, and needs to be as fully enveloping of the student's experience in the school environment. But also, it's important that the family fills out the questionnaire that is a part of the process, where they can give their input, they can give their experience, they can identify what works well in their environment or with their experience, what doesn't work so well, as far as interventions and processes that will help to empower the school psychologist to create an evaluation report, and eventually, the IEP team to produce a document or an IEP, an individual education plan, that is effective for the student. The evaluation report is based on the information that is gathered from observations, as well as I mentioned before, the parent questionnaire. The evaluation report must be completed, and all the information and data that is collected must be given to a school psychologist, and that psychologist is the individual who develops or produces the ER or the evaluation report. Next slide, please. Another part of the evaluation is to decide and to make a decision on whether the student is eligible for special education services. As I said, that is based on the information and the data that is gathered from multiple areas in the student's academic and personal experience. The eligibility process is a two-pronged process. So the first question is, does the student have a disability? And once that is affirmed and there is a recognition that the student has a disability, then the next question is, does that disability impede the student's educational process? In other words, does the fact that a student may have ADHD, for an easy example, does that diagnosis or does that disability get in the way of their learning? Is it causing them extreme difficulty in their academic environment? Is it getting in the way of their learning process? Next slide, please. So once a student is, once the evaluation is done, once the evaluation report is completed and it is identified that a student does qualify and is eligible for special education services, then the IEP is developed from the information that is compiled and put together in the evaluation report. The IEP, the Individualized Education Plan, is a part of the special education process that is designed as a tool to empower and to help students with unique needs to receive what's called, again, a FAPE, or a free and appropriate public education. The evaluation report includes the student's current educational levels, and it is important that they are recognized, not just their academic, oh, excuse me, not current, their current functioning levels, not just their academic functioning, but their social functioning levels, how they interacting with their peers, are their behaviors age appropriate, or are they behind socially? All of those components are brought into the IEP and the evaluation process. Next slide, please. Um, the IEP process and development of the IEP, again, is an extremely important part of this process. And um, as much as people at times are intimidated by being in meetings, uh, parents or caregivers, loved ones aren't comfortable in school settings or in meeting settings, the meeting is an extremely important part of the special education process. Meetings are the major vehicle that is used to for communication and development of information and tools, again, to be able to um, create an environment where the students can be as successful as possible. So I want to take a few moments to talk about what we described previously in the series as the main parts of a meeting. So the pre-meeting. The pre-meeting is when the family, and again, this is from a parent or a caregiver, a family perspective, where the family gets together and they prepare before they go into the meeting, identify what the goals are that they want from that meeting. If they need to um, write down what those goals are, write down what their questions are, write down what their concerns are, be prepared, do some work before going into the session, because often these meetings, team meetings, IEP meetings, can be very emotional, they can be overwhelming, they can be very challenging. And often when we're overwhelmed or in challenging or emotional, passionate situations, we may forget certain questions or forget certain things that we want to have answered. And so being prepared by writing it down, rehearsing what it is you want to say, being clear on what your expectations and goals are from the meeting will absolutely help the meeting to be effective. Another part is to compile and to get together all the necessary paperwork that might be useful in that meeting. There are times when students are getting services outside of school, or they may have some medical challenges or some outside of school experiences that the school staff may not know, but it may be important for them to know because it directly affects how a student behaves and responds. And it's good to know if a student's getting different therapies so that they can be coupled appropriately with school-based versions of those same therapies. Next slide, please. So once you've prepared for the meeting and you've done your due diligence and even prepared your mind for the process, now you're in the meeting. During the meeting, feel free to ask questions. Don't feel as if there's, when I was a kid, they used to say, there's no stupid question or no dumb question. And the truth of the matter is, if you don't know the information, it's important for you to get it, because this meeting is not about my pride as a parent and not wanting to be embarrassed, but it is really about having a student in a child-focused perspective and getting information so that we can help and empower them to be successful. So ask questions and be clear on what it is that you want to share. Be clear on what your goals are, what your ideas are, what you think would be best for your child. As I mentioned before, you are 50% of the IEP team. And you are the person who knows your child the best. You have a PhD in your son or your daughter or your grandchild. Also, when you're in the meeting, it's important to be creative in how we meet our child's and our students' needs. A lot of times we schools have a regular system or a process that they use pretty regularly, and often those ideas don't work for every student. So it's important to use creativity, and it's important to be able to uh, have a unique way of looking at the plan, because that student is unique in and of themselves. And then during that meeting, feel free to bring someone with you for additional support and help. And as you're wrapping up the meeting, the next and third step of the meeting process, again, be clear about the items that were discussed in the meeting. Ask those questions. Make sure there's clarity. Make sure that you identify the implementation process for new approaches and new ideas and new strategies. Who's going to do this? When is it going to be done? If plan A doesn't work, what is plan B? Being clear in those areas, because as I learned many years ago in this world, if it's not written, it's not real. And so we want to be clear, we want to be as concise as possible, and we want to know how we're going to do the implementation of the ideas that come up in these IEP and team meetings. And again, I think it's important that families and school staff follow up with each other via email or some form of communication, thanking each other and appreciating each other for working together. I know sometimes it might sound hokey because you don't like the person or you don't have a good rapport seemingly, but no matter what, the goal is to do what is best for the student that we're meeting on and we're meeting about and meeting with. It is about their needs. So we do have to recognize that we are a team, and we need to work together to make that happen. Next slide, please. So as we're talking about developing not just an IEP, but an effective IEP, oftentimes I've seen in my experience that if we're not intentional, that our IEPs and our documents and our strategies may or may not fit what is necessary for our students' growth. Sometimes we think because in fifth grade it worked, that in seventh grade it will work, and that often is not the case, as we are all growing and evolving and changing constantly as individuals. So developing an effective IEP is an extremely important process. So the family participation and engagement is extremely important in this process. Working from a strengths-based perspective. A lot of times we see the old adage, the squeaky wheel gets the oil. But truthfully, it's not about what our students cannot do well. We know that. We know where they struggle in certain areas. We know they struggle in certain environments. But let's look at developing an effective IEP based on not ignoring these challenges, but also not ignoring the strengths, so that we can figure out why is it that Johnny or Jill does well in this area and not that one. What is the strength-based perspective that we can bring to the table? And also work from the student focus perspective. A lot of times as parents and adults in general, when working with children with unique needs or what we would consider typical children, we do it from a top down, parent down, adult down perspective, and we lose focus from the child's perspective. What made sense for me in 1985 might not make sense for a student in 2019. The world is different. Their perspective on things is different, and we need to honor that for the IEP to be effective. The next, another important component is in developing an effective IEP is to make sure, and this is pivotal, we spent an entire session on this, is to make sure that we develop effective goals. We use the idea of SMART goals as a tool to be able to develop effective IEP goals. And so when we are, again, developing the IEP, we must look at having goals that are effective, goals that work, goals that are time sensitive, goals that are relevant, goals that really actually make sense for what we're trying to do for our students. Next slide, please. The next thing I want to talk about is the parent knowing and the families knowing your role. I'm going to take a little bit of time on this slide, because often, as I mentioned before, it can be challenging for a parent or a caregiver to be involved in this process for many reasons. One reason, you don't want your child to be labeled. You don't want your child to be tracked and not be able to get out of a system once he or she maybe no longer needs those supports or needs those accommodations. but your role as a parent is to do what is uh, best and use what is available to be able to empower your child to be his or her best and to be as productive in the school environment as possible. And your role as a parent, as a caregiver, is pivotal. You know your child the best. The school staff, they may see your child, 5 days a week, 6 or 7 hours a day, but the rest of their life, they're with you. You know what makes them tick. You know what makes them shut down. You know what brings the best out of them. Your role is pivotal and necessary in the success of the special education programming working, making sure, again, that the IEP and the goals that are in place for your child are what is going to work best for them. As I mentioned, you know your child the best. No one knows them better than you. Not only that, but because you know them the best, you are your child's best advocate. As we've talked a lot about the IEP, we haven't talked a lot about advocacy specifically or intentionally, but I'll take a moment to do that now. To advocate is to speak for and to support and to speak with someone who may need that additional support. And as a parent, who can speak better for your child? And it's a beautiful thing to be able to have a system in place where your voice can be heard and your voice can be recognized. Now, the reality of it is that sometimes you have to speak loud and speak strong, but you also have to speak accurately to be an effective advocate for your child, for your son, for your daughter. And the goal is not for you to always be their best advocate. As parents, we always will the best we can and work with our children and love our children and do our role and be our best to help them. But at a certain point, we need to turn over the reins of advocacy to them, to empower our children to be able to speak for themselves, to be able to articulate their own needs. And so, as an advocate and being the best advocate for our children, that is the next level of role. Because remember, special education process ends after graduation from high school. So the goal is to be able to empower students, to be able to help them to be successful after high school. And part of that would be able to be in it, them being able to speak for themselves, for them being able to advocate for themselves effectively. Another part or another reason that your role is so significant as a parent and a caregiver is that your child will respond to your energy and your attitude. It's important that even though maybe you don't get along with a particular teacher, and I don't mean to sound overly negative, but sometimes, again, when you have passionate individuals and we're working for and supporting children, we can get passionate and even emotional about some of the interactions. But remember, your child is feeding off of your energy. If you come home after a meeting saying Mr. Jones is the biggest jerk in the world, and your child hears that, your child will respond to that, and your child will probably express that, whether he or she verbalizes it or not. My mom doesn't like him. My dad doesn't like you, and so I don't like you either. Remember, your role is not just always what you say or what you do overtly and consciously, but sometimes what we extend and the energy we give and the attitude we give inadvertently to our children. They respond to that in a very significant way because of the impact and the significant role that you play in their life. Another thing that I want to talk about in relation to your role and the role you play is that not only, well, let me say this. You are a decision maker in this process. You are 50, as I mentioned before, 50% of the IEP team. Your opinion matters. Your thoughts matter. Your ideas, your goals, your aspirations for your child are very important to this process. But not only are you a decision maker, but our goal through here at Mission Empower and through the trainings and webinars and all of the information, our resource library, our toolkit on the website for our organization, is so that you're not just a decision maker, but you're an informed decision maker, and that you're making decisions and you're adding your input and you're bringing your influence to the table of these meetings and these conversations from a perspective that is not just based on emotion, not just based on passion, but also based on information and research. We want you to be informed and know what it is you're talking about, know what the rules are, know what your rights are, know what the processes are, so that you can, again, be an informed decision maker, and that your 50% of the team that you bring to the table is as impactful and as effective as possible. It's important to understand that, again, we all may be reaching and striving for the same goal, but we may be coming to it from different perspectives. And so it's, again, you want your perspective to be informed, you want your perspective to have that passion, but also have that proper information so that it is relevant and that it is it fits into the special education process. Uh, get the support that you need. This is a bit of a maybe a commercial for Mission Empower, um, but this is a challenging process. I worked since 1999 in social services, working with children, working with young people with unique needs, behavior, doing a lot of mental health work and behavioral work. Worked as an alternative education teacher for years, behavioral specialist, caseworker, so many different areas in social services working with young people. But when I began to work in the special education field, or area of support for young people, it was a whole nother world. And so as a parent, unless that you're trained in that, unless you have a lot of experience in it, it can be very daunting, very challenging, and actually a very imposing task to navigate the special education process and to navigate the special education system. And so feel free. It is not a sign of weakness to be able to go and to get someone to help you to advocate for your child, to reach out and go to a training, go to a class, get an advocate, get a support person, get someone that is maybe a little more fluent and fluid and informed in the area of special education, that they can work with you and empower you to strengthen you, to give you knowledge, to give you wisdom, to give you the tools that you can utilize in the process of advocating for your child. Get the support. Again, it is not a sign of weakness to do that. As a matter of fact, it is a sign of concern, a sign of passion, and a sign of your conviction that you're willing to do what is necessary to help your child be successful and to have the life and the educational experiences that they deserve. So your role is pivotal and your role is necessary. Don't be disengaged even if you feel disenfranchised. Don't be disengaged even if you feel unappreciated or even disrespected. Uh, Sometimes you have to advocate for yourself in these meetings as you're advocating for your child. Because we are all learning each other and we all come from different backgrounds. So I just wanted to take some significant time to kind of focus on your role and the role that you play as a parent and a caregiver. Going back, understand that this is a process, and special education is designed to be able to strengthen and to provide opportunities through accommodations, through the necessary adjustments in the student's schedule, adjustments to the curriculum that are necessary for that student to be able to maximize their ability. We didn't get too deep into all of that today. Again, this was just an overview, but understand that your IEP that you have for your child is a legal document. It is a contract, and you want things to be in that contract that are going to be most beneficial for your student and for your child. Remember, as I mentioned before, if it's not written, it's not real. So you have a right to request certain things to be in the IEP. When you're in the meetings, make sure that what you discuss, and if that's what the team agrees on, make sure that it is clear and concise and is written in the proper portions of that document. Because again, if it's not written, it's not real. And the IEP is a contract that is empowered by federal law to be able to make sure that your child has the right and has every opportunity to receive a free and appropriate public education. And so, next slide. Uh, that was our summation and review and wrap up of our Dissecting the IEP webinar series here at Mission Empower. Again, I hope that this was beneficial for you from week 1 to, or month 1, 2, 3, 4. Hope that it was beneficial for you. If you have questions or concerns, things that we did not answer for you, feel free. We have some time now to entertain questions. We also have a poll with a few questions that we'd like you to respond